Hey, what is up guys, and welcome back to a brand new video. Today I'm going to tell you about a few add-ons which I use to make a nice modern looking user interface for myself that is clean and out of the way when I don't want it, but present when I need it. The add-ons we'll be going over today are as follows, with timestamps shown on screen. LUI, which is a UI overhaul add-on, is responsible for most of what you see in Frame now, at least the purple stuff. Bagnon, because the LUI bag just doesn't quite cut it. TipTac to replace the less elegant LUI tooltips. Immersion, and Experiencer. All of these add-ons can be downloaded through the Curse client, but I will provide links to them in the description down below just in case. Remember that if you like the video, be sure to leave a like below and leave a comment telling me what you think about the video. If you want to see more videos like this or other World of Warcraft related content, be sure to get subscribed and hit that little bell icon so you're notified of when a new video of mine goes up. First on the list is, of course, LUI. Most of what you can see on my screen now is controlled by LUI. It handles everything from my unit frames, to the bar at the top which has a bunch of status information, to my action bars. You can go ahead and skip to the timestamp on screen if you don't want to know how to configure LUI. I'm going to be going into detail about how to configure most of the things you see here, and it won't be of any value if you're not interested. That being said, timestamps should come up now on screen for each of the sections of LUI. Skip ahead to the time that interests you most if you choose, or stick around to enjoy it all. The sections are as follows. LUI installation. SCADA/meters, artwork, unit frames, action bars, keybinds, and UI colors. Lastly, under the unit frames are the following specific unit frame timestamps: player, target, target of target, focus, party, PartyPet, PartyTarget, pet, raid, and boss. Getting into LUI, first things first. When you log in with this add-on installed, you should see a big install button. You're going to want to press that to get started. Moving on, one of the first things I'm going to want to do is set up my damage and threat meters. If you don't have damage or threat meters installed and don't want them, don't worry. Just skip this section by going to the timestamp on screen to get to the artwork. To do this, we're going to want to go into the LUI configuration first. To do that, either type /LUI or left click on the cog symbol in the menu in the top right. After opening the LUI configuration, open the frame section to the left. Then in the pane to the right, click the TPS tab. Now, from here, you're going to want to know the name of the frame of your threat meter. I am not sure about how other damage or threat meter add-ons name their frames, but I assume it's something similar to this. If not, and you have troubles, be sure to comment below letting me know, and if I'm able, I'll see if I can figure it out with your add-on and get back to you. In my case, I'm using the add-on SCADA. For SCADA, you'll want to type into your chat /SCADA config. Doing so will open a window to configure SCADA. You should automatically be put into the Windows section to the left. If you're not, go ahead and select and expand it. You should see a list of all SCADA windows you have. If you have only one, you'll need to create another one to fully utilize LUI. If you don't want to, however, that's totally fine. The instructions work for only one as well. But from here, you'll want to ensure your windows are named DPS and TPS as you see here. Also, ensure that the two windows are in the right places that you'll want them to be permanently. Move them to where you like, and go ahead and lock them into place. On a side note, you can also customize the background used for the title bar of your frames here as well. I like to set mine to use the background light step. Anyway, moving back to the LUI frames configuration, you'll want to select your add-on from the list. I'll select SCADA since this is the one I'm using. While it prompts you to do so, don't reload yet. In the TPS tab of the frames configuration, you'll want to modify the anchor text box. For SCADA, the frame will basically be SCADA bar window TPS. That's SCADA bar window and then whatever your TPS frame is named. Then press the OK button. Similarly, we'll want to move to the DPS tab and do the same for that one. Select SCADA, set the anchor to be SCADA bar window DPS or SCADA bar window plus whatever you named your DPS frame before. Then press OK. At this point, you can now hit accept for the dialog that says the UI needs to be reloaded. After doing so, you can test these buttons out near the top to hide and show the two frames. Don't worry if the backgrounds for them are a little jacked up, we can fix that. Just ensure the buttons are working. After that, open your LUI configuration again and go back to the frames section. Then to the TPS tab once more. You want to play with these values down here to get them just right. For my setup personally, it works best for me with an offset X of 9 and an offset Y of -11. A width and height of 180. Next thing we'll do is go to the artwork section of the LUI configuration and disable both of the lower art items. If you want to go for an even more minimalistic design than I have, you can also disable the themed background art part of the upper art section and go to the modules and disable the module titled info text. I do like using the info text module and the visuals, of course, so I'm going to go ahead and keep both of those on. Next, we have the unit frames, which I've been asked about several times now by a few viewers. To customize these, we'll open our LUI configuration and head down to the unit frame section, expand that item. The one I want to focus on first is the player unit frame. So select that one. The first thing I'll want to do in the General tab is ensure the unit frame is in the correct place. I'm fine with the X value, but I'm going to set the Y value to -325 instead of -200. That way it's a little more out of the way. After that, I want to go to the Bars tab and select the Health tab beneath that. I'll make sure both the texture and the background texture are set to Light Step. This is just the texture I like. You can pick whatever you like the most. Then I'll set the color to Gradient. This will make it so that it is green when you are high or full health, and more yellow to orange as you lose health. Next, we'll switch to the Power tab and set the same textures to Light Step. This time for the color, I'll select by type. That way it's blue for mana, yellow for energy, etc. Then we'll move to the Heal Prediction tab and enable that. You can set the colors to what you like, but I like to set both of the colors to 0.25 red, 1 green, 0.5 blue, 0.5 alpha. Next for the texture. If you're using Light Step, the only texture that goes with this, of course, is Light Step. But the texture acts a little odd with how it works, which I don't like. So I'm going to go with the Graphite option. After that, I also like to hop over to the Absorb Bar tab and set the same color and same texture. Next, we'll move to the Texts tab. And firstly, we'll go to the Name tab beneath that and enable it. We'll then set the font size to 14. Adjust this to whatever you need or prefer, of course. We'll then set the point to bottom left and the relative point to top left. We'll then set the X value and Y value according to preference. In my case, the X is about 24 and the Y is about 2. We'll leave the rest how it is. Next, we'll go to the Health tab. Set the font size to 14. I'll set both the point and the relative point to bottom right. Then the X value to -2 and Y value to 14. Again, these are my personal preferences. You set them up this way or whatever else ways so that they look the way you want. Then for the format, I know a lot of people like to operate on percentages, but in my opinion, as someone who world PvPs, it's better to have the actual numbers show so that you can, at max level, properly gauge about how powerful your enemy is. Similarly though, I like to keep the numbers consistent, so I set mine to that as well. I like to know what the maximum health is for this reason, but I also like to see what the current health is along with that. So I go with the format Absolute Short. This shows my health as 5M/5M. The rest can stay the same. Then we're on the tab Power Value. To ensure this fits on the small bar, I'll set the font size to 10. I'll then make sure the point and relative point are both set to bottom right. Then adjust the X and Y values appropriately. For me, X is 0 and Y is 1. For the format, standard or standard short seems fine to me. Mana, rage, energy, or what have you is not really as important information as health for PvP. I like to ensure it shows it full and shows it empty. Then make sure the color is an individual color, that color being white. After that, we'll move on to the Health Percent tab. First, I want to scroll down and select Show Always. Then back up and change the font size to 16. I can never figure a place for this that looks good at all times, as it still looks a little odd when you are AFK wherever you are. I'll set the X and Y values to my preference though, which is -32 for X and 5 for Y. Next, we'll move on to the Cast Bar tab. All I personally like to change here is the width to 500 and the textures, both background and normal to gloss. Then on the Text tab, I change both the fonts to Accidental Presidency. Moving on, we have the Portrait tab of the Player Unit Frame section. We'll enable this and tweak the values to what we need. I set my width to 80, my height to 30, and my alpha to 65%. There is one more tab if you want to customize it, and this is for the icons. Navigating to that tab and to the PvP one first, I'm going to enable that and, for testing's sake, flag myself. I'll change the point to left, and the X and Y values I'll change to -18 and 14 respectively. Then I'll head back to the Texts tab and go to PvP. I'll change the X to 28 and the Y to 0. Then I'll go back to the Icons tab and to the Combat tab under that, enabling it and setting the point to left and the X and Y to 8 and 0 respectively. On the resting icon, I'll enable it and set the X to -14 and the Y to 0. Then I'll set the point to bottom left. I'll disable Loot Master if that's enabled, since that's not really going to be a thing in Battle for Azeroth. Then I'll go to the leader icon and move it to X of 6 and Y of 18. The role icon isn't really needed, but I like to have it. I'll change its X to 9 and its Y to 8. I do want to change this one's size to 18 though. We can pretty much leave the raid icon as is. And the great thing about customizing one bar to what you like is that you can copy the settings. On the player unit frame, I'm going to go to the Copy Settings tab beneath the General tab and click the button that says Copy All. From here, I'll go to the same tab on the target unit frame. I'll check both include sizes and include positions, then click paste settings, and yes, I'm sure. I'll then go back to the general tab and set the position to what I like. I want it to be opposite my player unit frame, so I'll set the X and Y values to 200 and -325. I will want to go to the cast bar tab to customize the size and position though, so that it isn't confused with my own casting bar. My setup is about 360 width and 24 height, and 280 Y value. I'll leave the rest how it is. Similarly, we can keep our copied settings for target of target. I'll set the position of this to 224X and -200Y. The reason for this being that I like to make my target of target a little smaller than the other unit frames. I'll scroll down on the general tab and set the width to 200. Then to the bars tab, and for both health and power, I'll set the width to 200. For the target of target, I like to disable the portrait. It tends to bug out sometimes anyway, but I just think it's too distracting for something not as important. For the next bit, I'll set myself as my focus. I want to copy my settings from the target of target this time, since it'll look like a mirror of that. I'll then go to the focus unit frame and paste the settings. Only 4 quick things I'll have to change here. I'll set the X value of the position to -224 for one change, then go to the cast bar tab. I'll set the texture and background texture to graphite, as well as change the height to 18 and Y value to 76. Then in the text sub-tab, I'll set the font to Accidental Presidency. Moving on to the party frame, we'll copy the settings from the focus to that one. Next, we'll make sure to go to the general tab and set the padding to 75, set the X value to 285, and Y value to 100. I'll be sure to set the point to left. I'll jump over to the cast bar tab and set the X and Y values to -200 and 47.5 respectively. Next is the PartyPet frame. We'll paste the same settings as before here. There's going to be a little bit more work in this one over the others. In the general tab, we're going to set the X and Y values to 0 and 0, respectively of course. Then make sure the point is top left and the relative point is bottom left. I'll then go into the bars and under that power. I'll disable that, and under health I'll set the height to 15 and width to 95. The bar will look a little ugly at this point, but we're still tweaking it. Go to the general tab again and set the height and width according to what we set for the health bar, 15 and 95. Under texts, we'll disable all the sections except name. I'll go to the name text to configure it next. I'll set the font size to 10 and the X and Y values to 2 and 0 respectively. Then change the point and relative point to both be left. Then I'll uncheck color name by class. This one looks good, so we'll copy its settings and paste them all onto PartyTarget. We'll then change the point and relative point to be the opposite of the pet. Top right for the point and bottom right for the relative point. I like to then change the color for this health bar to be by class. With this all set up for the party members, you can see how the cast bar looks now. If you want a more condensed look and don't necessarily want the cast bar for each of your party members to show, you can also disable the cast bar, then go back to general and change the padding from 75 to 40. I will note before moving on that I'm going to be doing stuff for pets, and I don't play a class that uses a pet very often, so I don't know how relevant the stuff I'm going to be doing for the pet actually is. That being said, I'm going to copy the focus unit frame and move to the pet unit frame to paste it. I'll then set its X position to 0, then set the width to 100. I'll then update the width of the health and power bars to be the same, 100. I'll then go to the text tab and go to health percent and set its anchor point to bottom, and relative point to center, updating the X and Y to 0 and an 8, respectively, then changing the font size to 12. I'll then go to health value. I'll set the anchor point to top and relative point to center. Then I'll set the X to 0 and Y to 5. I'll update the font size to 10. Then we'll hop over to the name tab and change it to only show the name in its format. I'll update its point to be bottom and relative point to be top, and set the X and Y both to be 0. Over in the power value tab, all we have to do is update the point and relative point to both be bottom. The last thing we'll change here will be the cast bar. We'll jump over to that tab and set its width to 100. We'll then go to text and set both font sizes to 10. That should be all we have to do for the pet unit frame. Moving on, we have the raid unit frames in the bottom right. We're actually not going to copy any other unit frames for this, as it is currently almost what we want. We'll go to the raid unit frame and we're going to change the textures. Under the health tab beneath the bars tab, we'll change the texture and background texture to both be light step. Then set the color to be gradient. For the power tab, we're going to set the same textures but change the color to be by type. We're going to change the height to 7 and change the Y value to -26. Then we're going to go back to the general tab and set the height to 30. Next, we'll move on to the text tab and the name tab beneath that. I'm going to change the font size to 11. Then I'll go to the health percent tab and check both enable and show always below. Then we'll set the font size to 10. Set both point and relative point to top, and set the X value to 0, but Y value to -1. Then I'll scroll down and set the color to individual and make sure the color is white. I'll do a similar thing for the power percent. I'll go to that and enable it as well as check show full. But then I'll set the font size to 9. I'll also set both the point and relative point to bottom and set the X value to 0 and Y value to -2. Then I'll set the color for this to be individual and the color to be white. I'd also highly recommend going into the icons tab, then the role tab, and enabling that, then moving it somewhere such as is seen in the video now. Next up is the last unit frame I'll go over, the boss unit frame. This is for the bosses you may encounter in dungeons and raids. We're going to navigate over to that and make a couple changes. First thing we'll do is set the height to 26 instead of 24. Then go to the bars tab and health tab beneath that. Similar to the rest of the unit frames, we'll set the texture and background texture both to light step. Then set the color to be gradient. Then we'll go to the power tab and enable that. Set the height to 4, and the Y value to -25. Then we'll change the color to by type. At this point it's fine how it is, but I do like to see the health percentage, so I'll actually want to change the text. I'll go to the text tab and then the name one beneath that. Then set both the point and the relative point to left. Then I'll set the font size to 12 and set both the X and the Y values to 2. Then to the health percent tab. We'll enable that and check show always. Then set the point and relative point to right. We'll dial back the font size to about 12 specifically. Then set the X to -2 and Y to +2. Then we want to scroll down and change the color of this text to white. Anyway, that's about it for the unit frames. I would recommend doing any of the other unit frames if they are relevant to your gameplay. Also, one thing I'd like to mention before moving on to the next section are auras. On each of the unit frames, you can simply go and enable both buffs and debuffs for that unit frame under auras. Depending on the type of player you are, from casual to hardcore, target buffs and debuffs may or may not be very important to you. I'd recommend spending some time with this section if that's important to you or your class. Next up, we're going to configure action bars. First thing we'll do is go to the top texture from the dropdown in the top right of the bars configuration and disable it. We'll leave the bottom texture on though, since it's not hurting anyone. Then we'll go to action bar 1. Depending on how you like your bars to be set up, how you do this may be different. I like to have 6 bars that are each 6 buttons long, and I like them to be stacked into sections. I also like the sections to be visually separated, that way the distinction between the 2 bars is easier to make mentally. I'll set the horizontal position to -120. That way there can be some spacing for between this bar and the one beside it. Then I'll set the buttons per row and number of buttons to 6. Then set the scale to 100%. Lastly, we'll check Enable Fader. We'll do the same setting for Action Bar 2, then we'll enable Action Bar 3 and do the same there. You'll notice they're overlapping a bit now, so we'll go ahead and fix this. In Action Bar 2, we'll set the vertical position to 60. Then we'll set the vertical position of Action Bar 3 to 100. Next, we'll move on to doing Action Bars 4, 5, and 6. We'll enable all of these action bars and set all the settings to the same, with the exception of the horizontal position being +120 instead of -120. The vertical position will be 20 for Action Bar 4, 60 for Action Bar 5, and 100 for Action Bar 6. Next, I like to memorize what each of my buttons do and not have to look at them for visual reference at all times, so that they are free to be out of the way when I don't need them, which should be most of the time. I'm going to go to the fader section and go to Global Settings. Then I'll change the in alpha to 35% and set the out alpha to 0%. Then I'll set the fade time to 0.35 seconds. What these settings will do is make it where when I'm casting a spell, when I'm in combat, while my health is low, while my power is low, and while I'm targeting something, the opacity will be 35%. This is still out of the way, but present if I need it. And when none of those conditions are met, the bars disappear completely. The next section is keybinds. Obviously, set these up in whatever configuration best works for you, but I'll explain how my setup is. For each of these 6 button bars, I like the buttons to revolve around my left hand, which is going to be on WASD. I want the first 4 to be 1 through 4, but since 5 and 6 are a little out of reach for my resting state, I'll want to set the 5th button to R and the 6th button to F. In addition to that, each set of 6 buttons needs to have its own unique modifier, except the home bar. So for the home bar, the bottom left one, I'll set them to 1, 2, 3, 4, R, and F. To do this, I'll go to the general section of the bars section, and I'll scroll down and click Keybinds. I'll then mouse over the button I want to bind and press the key combination that corresponds to it. I'll then set the row to the right of that to be Alt plus the same keys, and set it up so that the top left is Control plus the same keys. In addition to this, I like to have a relationship between each of these 3 bars and another bar, which I'll access by pressing Shift. For the home bar, it's the one above it. For the Alt bar, it's the one above it. And for the Control bar, which is used the least, it's the bar to the right of it. so I'll set the middle left bar to be shift with the same keys. Then I'll press OK and test all the buttons out. Then I want to hide the shapeshift/stance bar, as I'll be accessing these by other methods. Then I'll set the extra action bar's vertical position to 150. I'll go to vehicle exit button and set its vertical position to -320, then set the horizontal position to -340. Then I'll set the scale to 80%. Doing this will set it so that it's next to my player unit frame. I will say also that the vehicle action bar keybinds can't be set up unless you are in a vehicle. I'll set mine to be buttons 5 through 0 though when I am in one. For the pet bar, I like to put it between me and my target and make it small. Again, remember, I don't main a class that uses pets, so I'm not too sure whether this is good or not for that. Adjust as needed. I'll go to the pet bar section and I'll set its anchor point to bottom. Then I'll set the horizontal position to 0. Move the vertical position to make sure the bar is within sight for resizing it. I'll adjust the buttons per row to be 5 so that it's 2 rows. Then I'll set the scale to be about 70%, so it's about the same height as my unit frames. I'll then set the vertical position to be 205 and enable the fader. Lastly, I want to move on to right bar 1. When I go here, I want to uncheck hide empty buttons and check open instant. Moving back to the general section, one thing you may have to do depending on your class is set how your action bar 1 functions, depending on your shapeshifts or stances. Being my character is a druid, I have different shapeshift forms, as well as stealth as a cat. The way I'll set mine up is default will be 1, bear form will be 1, moonkin will be 1, and both cat forms will be 8. With that all set up, I'm going to press all my buttons to test them. Great. I'm now going to set my actions to these buttons. Testing them out, they work great. We're now moving on to a particularly optional part, but I figured I'd show it for good measure. We're going to change the colors of the UI. In your LUI configuration, click the color section and you should have a theme drop-down box set to your class. I'm going to click the Save Theme button, and in the dialog that pops up, I'll type Wave, then press Save. This will create a new one with the name we want. For most of the colors, I like to use a combination of blue and red to make a deep violet color, placing emphasis on the blue. You'll see what I mean shortly. I'm going to go to the Frames tab first. Each of these 3 colors here are top texture color, bottom texture color, and minimap color. I'm going to change them to 0.28 red, 0 green, and 0.55 blue with an alpha of 1. To do that, I'm going to set the top texture color first, then I can click the copy button. I can then go to each of the other 2 and press the paste button. Next, to the panels tab. We're going to paste that same color onto the following options: chat frame color, TPS color, DPS color, and raid color. Then we'll go to the chat frame border color and set it to 0.28 red, 0 green, and 0.75 blue, with an alpha of 1. Then we'll copy that color and paste it onto TPS border color, DPS border color, and the raid panel border color. I don't use the second chat frame, but we can set its color to the first color we used, and its border color to the second color we used, if we plan on using it. Moving on, we're going to go to the color for the chat frame color and copy it. Then move to the bars tab and paste that on all 3 color slots. Then we'll go to the navigation tab and paste that same color on the top navigation button color, the orb color, and the orb background color. Then we'll go back to the panels tab and copy any of the border color values. Then come back and paste that on the top navigation button hover color, and the orb hover color. With that, go ahead and copy the top navigation button color, and go to the micro menu tab. We're actually going to use that color in one spot, and that's the micro menu button color. Then we'll set micro menu color to 0.55 red, 0.28 green, 1 blue. Copy that and we'll paste that onto micro menu button hover color, making sure to alter the alpha to be 1. Then we'll go to micro menu BG color and change that to 0.14 red, 0 green, and 0.28 blue with an alpha of 1. Copy that and paste it on micro menu BG second color. Lastly, we'll move to the MISC tab and change the chat edit box color to be 0.28 red, 0 green, and 0.55 blue, with an alpha of 0.28. Also, the buttons up top, which we just customized the colors for, will hide and show each of the 4 panels at the bottom. The chat frame itself will not go away, which is kind of annoying, but you can get an add-on to hide it for you, which is what I've done. The next add-on we're going to be diving into is Bagnon. Before dealing with that add-on, we'll open our LUI configuration and go to the modules section and click bags to disable the bags part of LUI. If you don't want to customize your Bagnon at all, then installing it is all you have to do and you are good to go. Otherwise, we're going to open our bags, which is all one bag now, and I'll click the little cog button in the top right of the window. I personally like to have as few buttons as I can, so I'm going to uncheck search toggle and options button. I can always right click the title for options later and double left click the title for search. I'll also uncheck data broker plugins. I'm then going to set the background color to 0.07 red, 0 green, and 0.14 blue, with an alpha of 1. I'll then change the border color to 0.55 red, 0.28 green, and 1 blue, with an alpha of 1. Then I'll change the number of columns to 14. This makes it so that later on, if I have 4 hexweave bags that are 30 slots each, and my main bag, which is 20 slots, that's 140 slots, so 140 by 14, that's 10 rows. Then we'll go to the bank frame and do pretty much the exact same thing, except we'll also uncheck the money display, as well as change the number of columns to 12 instead of 14. I don't have this personally, but if you had a bank full of 30 slot bags, that'd make it so that you have 20 rows. We'll also keep all the same settings for the guild bank and for void storage. The only exceptions are that we'll keep the money on for the guild bank since it's not redundant information, and for some odd reason the guild bank and void storage fields for columns configures the number of rows you want. So I'm not sure what you'll want to do with that, but I leave mine at the defaults. After that, we'll be moving on to the add-on TipTac. We're going to install that, then go back into the LUI configuration and disable the tooltips, then accept the UI reload. Then we'll type /TipTac. On the first page, all I like to change is, I like to check show player gender, and I like to change the targeting U text. This is the text that shows in the tooltip when the unit you are mousing over has you targeted. For that reason, I like to have the text be a bit more obvious, so I have it be very colorful and loud. I'll put what I'm pasting here in the description down below for you to copy if you wish. Then I click the reaction section and check show the unit's reaction as text, so as to show the state of the unit I'm mousing over, such as friendly, hostile, dead, or otherwise. Next, I'll go to the backdrop section and change the backdrop edge size from 14 to 16. And uncheck the pesky Show Gradient Tooltips option. Then I'll change the tip background color to 0.07 red, 0 green, 0.14 blue, and 1 alpha. Next, I'll change the tip border color to 0.55 red, 0 green, 1 blue, and 1 alpha. Next, I like my tooltips to fade out for a longer time, so I'll go to the fading section and leave the pre-fade time at 0.1, but change the fade out time to 0.4. I'll then move to the bars section and firstly change the font to Fritz Quadrata TT with the font flag set to none. Secondly, we'll set the bar texture to graphite, and set the bar height to 12.56. Moving on to bar types, I'll first check show condensed bar values, and set the health bar text to just values. Under auras, I'll just check put aura icons at the bottom instead of top, and only show auras coming from you. Then under icon, I'll uncheck show raid icon, and then check show class icon. Then lastly, we're on the anchor section. We're only going to change the first 4 here and the last 2. For the first 4, that's world unit type to mouse anchor, world unit point to bottom, world tip type to mouse anchor, and world tip point to bottom. For the last 2, we'll change the frame tip type to parent anchor and the frame tip point to bottom. This will make it so that things you mouse over in the world have a tooltip near your mouse, and when you mouse over things in a frame, it anchors to the bottom of that thing you are mousing over. After that, you click this anchor button and move it to wherever you like. I like mine to be in the bottom right corner. The next add-on I'd recommend for this UI is Immersion. This add-on basically brings a more typical user interface to interacting with NPCs, one that you'd see in other RPGs. You'll notice when I talk to an NPC, they go on their little spiel, then I can select from a menu the dialogue option I'd like to pursue. Setup is pretty minimal. Once you get it installed, you don't really need to configure anything, but in the event that you do want to customize it, you can do so through the configuration window by typing /immersion. Next up is an add-on I've somewhat recently found that I like to use, particularly with LUI for experience. I used to use X to level to handle all my experience needs, but the more I've used this one, the more I've learned to love it by itself. That add-on, as you can see below, is Experiencer. When you're at max level, this is great for showing your reputation as well as your artifact power for Legion, as well as will probably be used for Azerite in Battle for Azeroth, though time will tell. When you're leveling, it's great for displaying your experience. And the great thing about it is that you can do multiple at once if you'd like. That means you can do experience and artifact power in Legion. I really just like to change the font and the color of the bar. When I initially installed the add-on, I configured it a little bit more, but that was mostly because I wanted to also use X to level with this, which I decided is really not necessary. I like to change the font face to prototype, as well as change the font scale to 120%. I also changed the color to the typical 0.28 red, 0 green, and 0.55 blue. To access these options, you can just right-click the bar and then mouse over frame options and then change them from there. So there we have it. All the add-ons I currently use to make a slick interface for myself to play the game with. There's not a lot of them, but there's a lot of customization in it. If you stuck through it all, I really hope you enjoyed. I know a few people have been asking about my UI setup, and I promised an in-depth customization guide for LUI. I wanted to be thorough in it, and so I put a lot of work into this video. I hope it was worth it and you found it useful. If you did find it useful and or entertaining, I would greatly appreciate it if you could leave a like on the video down below to show your support, and be sure to leave any comments you have about the video while you're down there. If you'd like to see more videos like this one, particularly guides and other World of Warcraft related content, do make sure you get subscribed. If you want notifications of when those videos go up, be sure to ring that little bell next to the subscribe button. That all being said, thank you very, very much. I hope you have a fantastic rest of your day. I'll see you next time.